You mentioned Zohran Mamdani. He's obviously a politician that we in Britain are intrigued by. You know, the fact that there is this socialist in control of New York City. We're following it quite closely. I've been quite horrified by some of the arguments he's been putting forward and some of the allies he's made. You mentioned Chevalier, the Democratic Socialist in New York. The thing that horrified me most about her is that she went on one of the 8th of October protests. She went on the 8th of October protest in Manhattan. I know we should always give people the benefit of the doubt, but in my mind, anyone who went on an 8th of October protest as the pogrom was still happening, should just be written off as the scum of the earth. That's my view. We had them in London. There was a famous one in Sydney, in Berlin, people pouring onto the streets essentially to celebrate the mass murder of Jews. What is the, how would you explain the centrality of Israel to the mindset of Mamdani and the other kind of up-and-coming radicals around him? Is it just anti-Semitism, or is it part of that kind of third worldist agenda? Is it anti-Westernism? How do you explain why it's become such a central feature?
So it's all the above, but I think of what you just said. I think anti-Westernism really is kind of the ultimate guiding principle. You think about what the radical left seeks to do. Think about what Karl Marx tried to do. Karl Marx wrote about a global revolution of the proletariat over the capital class. Ultimately, though, he was calling for the overthrowing of Christendom itself, where Christendom was synonymous to him with Western civilization, and rightfully so, because I argue that Western civilization is just the outflow of the biblical inheritance. But if you want to start there, it makes sense, albeit in a logical, diabolical way, to start with the original people of the book. The original people of the Bible, the original people who received God's word at Mount Sinai. And that's why Marx, it's right there. He actually wrote his pamphlets on the Jewish question before he even wrote the Communist Manifesto. And I think that's why a lot of these people that ultimately want to overthrow the United States, want to overthrow contemporary Christendom, they start with Judaism and the Jewish state. It's actually right there. So this woman Chevalier is actually a great example. So she was one of the founders of Columbia University Apartheid Divest, which is the Columbia University student group. Nominally, purportedly, it's just dedicated to abolishing Israel, Palestinian rights, et cetera, et cetera. But if you actually look at their stated goals in their bylaws, what they actually say they're for nothing less than the eradication of the United States of America. This is also Black Lives Matter's explicit goal. They call for the eradication of America. This is an increasingly common, at times ubiquitous sentiment on the left. You have all these crop of radicals who are trying to at times justify 9/11. So this woman who was just elected out in Colorado, I believe she's of Ethiopian origin, if I'm not mistaken, was kind of sort of saying, well, 9/11, I mean, what do you expect? You're gonna meddle so much, you're gonna topple those regimes, they're gonna lash out. So it really is coming from this fundamentally anti-Western place. And a corollary to that, which is an argument that I have in my book as well, Israel and Civilization, is it's coming also from a genuine conviction of globalism and anti-nationalism. So one of the reasons I argue that the United Nations is so fixated on Israel is that Israel in many ways is a quintessential nationalist endeavor. It's a very nationalist endeavor. There are flags everywhere. There's conscription. There's mandatory military service. And there's actually a very long history for that. I would actually argue that the biblical antecedent for the contemporary nation state was King David uniting the tribes in the capital of Jerusalem. That's kind of the ancient antecedent. And back in antiquity, you could actually contrast that with the vision of empire that was put forward by the Romans. So you have empire versus the nation state. And if you hate the nation state, if you just want liberal utopia, if you want liberal empire, if you want globalism, if you want unicorn farts and John Lennon's song Imagine, then you're going to go after the strident nationalism, the strident particularism of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And that particularism, which really has been this refusal to bow to the homogenizing forces of globalism, of utopianism, that's really the Jewish people's calling card throughout the ages for thousands of years. And ultimately is both our greatest strength and also the greatest reason why a lot of people tend to hate us, because we just refuse to bend the knee and to bow down to all these would-be globalist forces. And that accounts, I think, for a lot of anti-Semitism, but also a lot of this obsession, frankly, really just obsession with Israel. So I think it's that, but even more so than that, it's kind of what I said earlier, which is this desire to genuinely tear down Christendom, Western civilization, and you start logically with the original biblical religion, which is Judaism and the Jewish state.
Yeah. In Europe, we say that the lesson Europe took from the Second World War is that nationalism is terrible. And the lesson the Jews took from the Second World War is that we really need a nation. Otherwise, we're screwed. So that's that's the fork in the road. And you can see the hostility that is now generated. All these globalist Europeans who hate the Zionist entity more than anything in the world. And it really kind of springs from all of that, those earlier sense of animus. I wanted to ask you about the genocide libel, because it's still very strong on the left in particular. I sometimes think to myself, a lot of the kind of woke myths of the left are starting to fall apart. Certainly in the UK, for example, trans women are women. That's kind of falling down now. The idea that diversity is our strength, that is now openly called into question by lots of people. But the one lie that still clings on is the idea that Israel is committing a genocide, which seems to me to be one of the most dangerous lies of our time. Is that still widespread in the US? I guess it is on the American left. But what do you think? What's the state of it there? And what might be done to try and dislodge this idea from people's minds?
Listen, it's a great question. So it is definitely a widespread sentiment on the left. So you had Scott Wiener, who for a long time refused to call it genocide, was just criticizing the Netanyahu government and so forth. And he was actually, himself, a very, very far left gay Jewish man, was actually, in the shocking footage, was booed out of the LGBT parade in San Francisco for not calling it genocide. And in fact, Ro Kahana, who's now clearly running for president in 2028, congressman from California, just got back from Israel, had this whole ridiculous stage photo op of playing the victim card. He said that he was arrested or stopped by these horrible machine gun wielding Israelis. Like bro, it's called a checkpoint. It's pretty common actually. But he's now criticizing Democrats who won't call it genocide. So it's very, very common on the left. On the right, listen, you'll see it from Tucker Carlson. You'll see it from Marjorie Taylor Greene. People who, whether you want to call it the woke right, the retard right, I kind of like the latter, frankly, the retard right. People who take an almost pro-Russia, pro-China at time view of geopolitics. Marjorie Taylor Greene's gotten very close to Code Pink, which is basically a Chinese influence operation here in the United States. People who buy into these foreign operations, and by the way, this is one of the great ironies, right? Is a lot of people say, oh, the Jews are running these foreign information operations. But in reality, a lot of it's actually coming from hostile actors like Russia, China, in some ways Qatar, etc. So people who are part of that ecosystem, who are following Alexander Dugin, the Rasputin for Vladimir Putin, and there actually is that niche. That's a real niche here in America, unfortunately. I think it's terrible. People who are in that Dugin adjacent bubble on the right, or the quote unquote right, will accuse Israel of genocide. It's really not particularly big beyond that. As you correctly point out, is one of the most infamous libels or horrific libels in contemporary political discourse. I mean, for starters, the Arab population in Gaza has absolutely exploded over the past 30, 40, 50 years, whatever sample size you want to use. Typically not how a genocide is actually done. And the numbers in this are just so overwhelming. I mean, think about the actual civilian to combatant death ratio. So John Spencer, who's now all over the news, he's the head of urban studies at West Point, probably the Western world's foremost expert in urban warfare. The numbers that he has crunched show that the war in Gaza was the single most humane, I know a lot of people might be laughing, it's the single most humane war in the history of modern urban warfare when it comes to a civilian to combatant death ratio. Is actually 1.5 to 1, which was better than how the United States did in Fallujah fighting ISIS 2016. Back then, it was actually 2.5 to 3 to 1, give or take. So that's what I try to do, Brendan, is I try to talk about facts because I live in a very stubborn world sometimes where I think facts still matter. This is kind of the greatest problem of all, though, is how do you make facts and logic and reason matter in an age that is driven by clicks and algorithms and social media virality, and above all, really just emotions. I think sometimes about my friend Ben Shapiro, whose famous catchline about a decade ago. Ben said that facts don't care about your feelings. And that probably was true when he said it, but it's just not true anymore. And I think one of our great struggles is how we make it true again, because that's the world that I want to live in, but unfortunately it's just not the world that we currently live in.